hang in the balance, depending on the political whims and the latest appointment to the Supreme Court. We in Illinois are establishing an affirmative right for women to access safe and legal abortion. We are sending a clear message to women of Illinois that we value you and we value your identity and the ability to make your own choices and control your own destiny. Unfortunately, many states are going in the opposite direction. In 2019 alone, we saw the following states enact bans or severe restrictions on abortion. They include Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Ohio, Utah, Arkansas, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Missouri. A note, today it was reported that the last abortion clinic in Missouri will not be able to renew its license. The reality is that in these states, abortion rates will rise. Global statistics show that the rate of abortion decreases when women have access to a full array of reproductive health care. The opposite happens when abortions are restricted and banned. Abortions are then driven underground, and the women with the least resources are most at risk. The book, The Handmaid's Tale, portrays a dystopian world where women are treated like little more than wombs, vessels for giving birth. The handmaids who have stood vigil for months in the Illinois legislature symbolize the efforts to make abortion illegal and all reproductive health care obsolete and inaccessible to women. The wave of efforts to ban abortion sweeping the country are dangerous and deliberate, and women are living in fear. We deserve to control our bodies and our lives. Later in pregnancy, women deserve to be able to preserve their health and fertility and handle the devastating loss of a pregnancy in the best way for them, their families, in consultation with their doctors. Why do we, as politicians, feel in any way qualified to make these very personal decisions for women and their families? Why are we even discussing what happens in the late stages of pregnancy, how to handle high-risk pregnancies, miscarriages, etc.? None of us have the medical training to do so or any experience in dealing with these complex medical issues. So why are we weighing in? Over the past several weeks, we have watched the anti-choice extremists use inflammatory rhetoric designed to mislead regarding so many components of this bill: the right of conscience, where abortions can be performed, who can perform abortions. This bill only permits abortions within acceptable medical practice, as you heard our sponsors say over and over again. And folks, the myth of the elective so-called late-term abortion is just that. It is not based on the reality of obstetrical care. It does not reflect what happens later in pregnancy when things go terribly wrong with a wanted and planned pregnancy. The opponents who spoke against this bill in committee have no medical experience. They're from religious organizations. They don't have the right to speak for me or millions of women in Illinois, and they certainly don't have the right to advise any of us on the way to handle our own health care. But that's exactly what's happening throughout the country. I truly believe it's a matter of when and not if Roe versus Wade is overturned. This bill is, in large part, about that. It's about ensuring that Illinois women have access to safe and legal abortion. But this bill is about so much more. It's about establishing an unequivocal, foundational ability of women to control their bodies, their health care, and their lives. Don't we want that for our mothers, our wives, our sisters, and our daughters? I just can't imagine living in a world with anything less. Please vote yes.
The chair recognizes Representative DeLuca for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
She indicates that she will.
First, I want to acknowledge Representative Bourne. I thought you did a beautiful job, Representative, and I wish you all the best on your pregnancy. Representative Cassidy, some of this is redundant. These are the main concerns of some folks in my district. And although some of the questions may have been asked in some form or another, I want to ask the question. So first, in section 120, under prohibited state actions, causes of action, where it states that the state shall not deny, restrict, interfere with, or discriminate against an individual's exercise of the fundamental rights set forth in this act, including individuals under state custody, control, or supervision. Does this mean that the state will be unable to impose parental notification?
The Reproductive Health Act does not impact parental notification. That law remains on the books.
Thank you. And under the definitions of health of the patient, which means all factors that are relevant to the patient's health and well-being, including but not limited to physical, emotional, psychological, and familial health and age. Could a healthy woman with a viable pregnancy choose to terminate her pregnancy for any reason at any time?
The Reproductive Health Act does not change the current standard of practice, and doctors are required to adhere to accepted standards of clinical practice.
So under Senate Bill 25, will it require the approval of a healthcare professional or physician?
A doctor would be permitted to provide abortion care in accordance with their professional judgment and training and based on accepted standards of clinical practice consistent with the scope of their profession. If the doctor determines that the fetus is viable, the doctor can only provide an abortion if, in the professional judgment of the doctor, the abortion is necessary to protect the life or health of the patient. This is the current standard for viability. The health of the patient means all factors which are relevant to the patient's health and well-being, including but not limited to physical, emotional, psychological, and familial health and age. And I believe you asked about who can perform as well. Is that part of your question? Was that part?
First, let me go to this.
Okay.
In regards to the facilities where abortions are performed, will Senate Bill 25 exempt regulatory requirements?
Sorry, I have to go back. I'm sorry. The provisions of the Ambulatory Surgical Treatment Center Act that requires abortions to be performed in ambulatory surgical treatment centers, like many hospitals, have been blocked for decades pursuant to a consent decree entered in Ragsdale versus Turnock. Under the consent decree, an abortion clinic is only subject to regulation under the ASTC Act if the facility is primarily devoted to the performance of surgical procedures. Procedures performed in facilities that are not subject to ASTC licensure are regulated in accordance with various statutory and regulatory requirements governing medical care in Illinois, as well as zoning, fire, and building codes. There's no reason to single out abortion when Illinois law already provides that all medical procedures are to be performed under circumstances to ensure maximum safety. In-clinic abortions are very safe. In terms of risk level, they are similar to other gynecological procedures that take place in doctors' offices every day. And the same requirements that are in place now will still be in place after this.
Thank you. Does Senate Bill 25 mean that healthcare professionals other than doctors will be able to perform procedural or surgical abortions?
No, the RHA codifies current law under which only physicians may perform procedural abortions. Advanced practice clinicians, APCs, such as physician assistants, may assist, but may not independently perform a procedural abortion.
Thank you. Does Senate Bill 25 require all health insurance policies, even those purchased by schools, churches, or religious entities and persons and organizations with moral religious objections?
Excuse me, Representative DeLuca. Representative Tepetti, would you like to offer your time to Representative DeLuca? Representative DeLuca for 5 minutes.
Thank you. With moral religious objections to abortions to cover abortion services?
No, our state's existing Healthcare Right of Conscience Act already provides protections for those with moral or religious objections, including permitting insurance companies and other health care payers to opt out of coverage for any health care service to which they have a documented conscience-based objection. This is the same way that contraceptive coverage requirements are handled for entities with conscience-based objections. Regardless, the bill does add language to clarify this point. I understand that some members have received calls and letters from various institutions or companies claiming that their insurance providers are not asking whether the employer has a conscience objection to provide coverage for services such as abortion. It is my understanding and belief that the Healthcare Right of Conscience Act provides that any healthcare payer, including a company paying for healthcare, has a right to opt out of the coverage mandate. A healthcare payer is defined as a health maintenance organization, insurance company, management services organization, or any other entity that pays for or arranges for the payment of any healthcare or medical care service, procedure, or product. The language covers any company purchasing insurance, not just those who are self-insured. For purposes of legislative intent, I want to make it abundantly clear that the intent of the language in this bill is to require an insurance company to offer a health care product, but the intent is not to interfere with the right of the entity purchasing the product to refuse to provide coverage for abortion care.
Thank you. These were the issues that I heard most from my constituents, so I wanted to ask these questions. I appreciate you taking the time to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you.
The chair recognizes Representative Morgan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
She indicates that she will.
Representative, just to clarify for the record, are you a physician?
No, I am not.
To your knowledge, is there anybody in this entire chamber of the House of Representatives who is a physician?
Not to my knowledge.
One of the other comments that was made by my colleague on the other side of the aisle is that we're all aware that individuals come to the state of Illinois regularly to seek reproductive health care. I was wondering, and especially coming from places like Missouri, Indiana, Alabama, Georgia, I was wondering if you could help the body understand why that might be.
Well, we were just told that Missouri is closing their last clinic, and we've spoken a great deal about the focused, strategic, and concerted effort across the country to restrict access to abortion. And the reality is people of means work around those restrictions. But people in Missouri without the ability to work around it, for them, the right is gone. It's just gone.
So, Representative, would you say that's one of the most important underlying aspects of why we need to pass this legislation today?
Given what we have seen across the country and watching how determined the opposition is to take away my right to self-determination, my right to bodily autonomy, I think it's important that we as a state respond with equal force and vigor to defend that right to self-determination and bodily autonomy.
Thank you, Representative. To the bill. For those of you who were in committee to hear this legislation, you heard me speak about my unyielding commitment to not just my spouse, but also my daughter as she grows up and becomes older, to make the healthcare decisions that are right for her and for them. I continue to stand in favor and support of that commitment. We speak in this House floor about a super-duper minority or super-duper majority. And in fact, if we look at my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, we have a super majority of men. And I bring that up because when we talk about a super majority of men versus women, it does not reflect the demographics of the state of Illinois. In fact, there are more women in the state of Illinois than men. But in this body, we have a super majority of men making decisions, and potentially making decisions right now about the health and well-being of women on their behalf. And I reject that. I will not stand for that. I stand as a man in support of a woman's right to choose. stand in support of women. I stand in support of women's choice. I urge a yes vote.
Chair recognizes Representative West for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the bill, ever since the Reproductive Health Act was filed, I've had numerous letters. I received numerous letters, emails, calls, and texts from people in support and in opposition of the bill. On top of that, came a police escort from my office to the House floor during Advocacy Day, 4 threats to my life if I supported this bill. Even worse still, a promise that my wife and I would have a cursed life along with my future children if I supported this bill. My wife, my family. And what was sadly disturbing is that it's coming from my fellow brothers and sisters of the Christian faith. I'm State Representative West, a lawmaker from Rockford, Illinois, and a preacher of the gospel of Jesus Christ. 2 offices, 2 callings that I am honored to hold and will never take lightly. I've been a minister since 2011 at my dad's church. I've been a legislator since January. I stand firmly on the separation of church and state, a stance that is a biblical decree and a constitutional order. Mark 12:17 says, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." The First Amendment of the Constitution states that we shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. One thing I love about Jesus is that he gave us free will. He was crucified and rose again in 3 days so that for our sins, so that we could choose to live for God. Choose. We have that free will. I go down that road because I am gravely concerned with what transpired in Georgia, Alabama, Missouri, Ohio, Kentucky. Policies put in place that are putting chains on women. As you can see, I'm a black man. My ancestors had physical chains and laws that govern their bodies. We fought a civil war because we wanted to keep black bodies chained and enslaved. And now you're asking me, a black man, to put policy chains on a woman's body, on reproductive health. If you feel that this is wrong, then you have that right. You honestly do. For my anti-reproductive health community, keep doing what you're doing. You have that right. That's the beauty of freedom. That's the beauty of choice. To my pro-reproductive health community, keep doing what you're doing. You have that right. That's the beauty of freedom. That's the beauty of choice. But now we're living in a time where government is trying to take away basic freedoms, personal choice. And that worries me more than the threats to my life or the promised curses on my life. I'll handle those. I know how to pray against those. At this time, I've decided to trust women to do what's best for themselves. Women, I trust you.
Chair recognizes Representative Gont Gershowitz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, members of the House. There have been, and there will be, many opinions and conjecture on this issue, and while we are all entitled to our own opinions, we are not entitled to our own facts. So I want to make something very clear for the record. Under our constitutional framework, at the federal and state level, there are two sources of law, statutory and common law as developed by the courts. It is my understanding that the primary difference between the Reproductive Health Act as originally filed and this version is language with respect to abortions later in pregnancy post-viability. Is the intent of this version of the Reproductive Health Act to codify common law standards developed under Roe versus Wade, which reflects the framework we live under now?
Yes.
To the bill. The substance of this bill has been out there for months, and there has been no shortage of incendiary rhetoric and misinformation disseminated by those who intend to strip women of their rights under Roe versus Wade. No woman I have ever known at any point in my life decides to terminate a healthy pregnancy moments before birth as opponents of choice would have us believe. In rare cases where a woman chooses an abortion later in pregnancy, it's because something has gone tragically wrong, and she is faced with a choice that only her and her doctor are qualified to make, not government and not the 118 members of this body. This isn't about what I believe. It's about whether women have agency over their own lives to decide what they believe. I trust women to own the self-determination over what happens to their bodies and their lives. To my mother, to my nieces, Jennifer, Samantha, Zoe, and Olivia, to my colleagues, to my sisters, to my friends, I trust you. This isn't about challenging anyone's religious convictions. This is about our power to know our own minds, our God, our bodies, our choice. And I, for one, do not need anyone in this room to make that for me. To the women throughout history who have been devalued, dismissed, and discounted, this is our moment to say that we will not go back. I urge an aye vote.
Chair recognizes Representative Ammons for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the bill. First and foremost, this bill has gone through many changes to make sure that people understand what the bill entails. And as my colleague here on my aisle have expressed, this is a bill that really hits at the heart of individual choice. African American women were not always able to make decisions about their bodies or their babies in this country. And quality health care has stood afar for us for many, many generations. I wanted to share just a little bit about why I respect Representative Flowers, who's been working on Black women and Black women maternal health. I want to share some of the facts. As my colleague just mentioned, we don't get to pick them, we just have to repeat what they actually are. Quality, patient-centered reproductive health care is critical to improving maternal health and addressing the reproductive health disparities that Black women face, including higher rates of unintended pregnancies and restricted access to abortions. Researchers attribute these disparities to a number of factors, including disparities in access to high-quality health care generally and family planning services specifically. Indeed, women with unintended pregnancies are at high risk or increased risk for maternal mortality and morbidity, maternal depression, experiencing physical violence during pregnancy, infant mortality, birth defects, low weight, and preterm birth. Where we don't have access to reproductive health and choice, we see that as reproductive oppression, similar to the oppression we experience during and post-slavery experiences. Black women are more likely to report having been pressured to see a clinician who gives them bad advice around contraceptive methods. We are in support today. I stand in support of this bill, Senate Bill 25, so that we can, for sure, make sure it's clear that we have complete agency and we have discretion as to what is in the best interest of Black women and their families. I have experienced this, what we're acting out today, in my personal life, and I have had to help young women who live in other states get access to real reproductive health in our state. Because in states that they reside in, they don't have choice. Today is truly about choice. It's about privacy. It's about the right to determine. And we should stand together against the agencies of others who want to make the decisions for us. We reject that ideology, and I stand in support of this action by my colleague, Representative Cassidy, and I urge an aye vote.
The chair recognizes Representative Brady for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
She indicates that she will.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I had no intention whatsoever to speak on this bill today. And I'm not going to speak to it as a father of 2 children, one who's actually 18 years old today, my son Tom. And I'm not going to speak to religious, emotions. Whatever your opinion is your opinion. But I heard a lot of discussion from Representative about we're codifying existing law. We're codifying existing law. And then also a lot of discussion of the problems that occur with abortions in the back alleys, in the back streets of what goes on today is the reason why we have to have some of these changes for safety, for health. I don't know about all that. And as has been pointed out, the representatives have both talked today and done their jobs. It's been said that Representative's not a doctor, Representative Bourne's not a doctor, I'm not a doctor, there's no doctor here. But I am a former coroner. And from technicality, I have a concern of something, Representative. And I'm concerned because I didn't get a clarified answer when a question was posed to you. On page 50 of your bill, in section B, line 11, stricken from that bill is the ability of the county coroner to be notified of maternal or fetal death due to abortion. I'd simply like a clarification. Am I wrong that that's being stricken from page 50 of your legislation?
We are treating abortions like any other health care. Abortion is not a crime. There's no restriction on the ability to do an investigation. It's taking away the requirement. According to the county code governing the duty of county coroners, death during or after a medical procedure does not trigger a coroner investigation, except for in the case of abortion. We are treating abortions like any other health care.
Anesthesia used in an abortion?
We are treating abortions like any other health care.
My question was, is anesthesia used in abortions?
Not being a doctor, I can't speak to that. Death during or after a medical procedure does not trigger a coroner investigation, except in the case of abortion. We are treating abortion like any other health care.
Representative, to page 50 of your bill, line 11, section B, stricken is the notification clause of maternal or fetal death due to abortion.
We are treating
County
abortions
coroner.
like any other health care.
No, we're not. You're not doing it with that language.
Yes, actually, we are.
We're not, Representative, we're not codifying existing law. What you've done is you've gone in and changed current law in Chapter 31 of the Illinois compiled statutes as it pertains to coroner's notifications of deaths in this state.
We are treating abortions like any other health care.
Thank you very much.
The chair recognizes Representative Tarver for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Will the sponsor yield?
She indicates that she will.
Thank you.
I guess I
Madam
had to
Chair.
think about it.
Madam Chair, I stand in support of Kelly and this bill. I think you remember a few weeks ago, April 10th, I had my 6-year-old daughter here. You were in the chair at that time as well. And when I think about my job as a father of a 6-year-old, my job is to tell her what's best for her. My job is to make decisions for her related to her body. That's my job now. My job as a father also is to raise her to be independent, to think for herself, and to allow her to make decisions for herself and her body. That's my job as a father. And not even to necessarily like every decision that she makes, but to support those decisions. You know, every moment that I'm down here, I miss my daughter. I really do. I missed her last night. I didn't make it home to see her. I'll be going back tomorrow, as I do every week, to see her. And I feel as though I need to justify my time when I'm down here. Because when I go home, I take her to school in the morning. She asks me, you know, Daddy, what are you doing in Springfield? What is your job? And I explain to her my job is to make laws, right? Or at least to help make laws and policies and things like that. And I really can't figure out how the hell I go home and explain to her that I supported something that takes us backwards. I really can't wrap my mind around how I would do that. And to look her in her eyes and tell her that I'm doing something that is going to strip away her ability to make decisions for herself, at the same time that I raise her to be smart and independent and make decisions for herself. So I only stand up in support of common sense bills, right, and run my mouth a little bit. This is one of those bills. I'm happy to support it. I'm happy to support it not only for my, for my daughter, but for my sisters, cousins, your daughters, and every woman in America, quite frankly, not just in Illinois. I think it's time that we as men take a step back, realize we don't know everything, and allow women to make decisions for themselves the same way we've always had the ability to make decisions for ourselves. So I thank you for bringing this forward. I support you, and I would just urge everyone to press the green button. Thank you.
The chair recognizes Representative Feigenholtz for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Will the sponsor yield?
She indicates that she will.
Representative Cassidy, if Roe is overturned and Senate Bill 25 does not pass, abortions would still be legal, correct?
If Roe's overturned, abortion would still technically be legal in Illinois, but could become increasingly hard to access because of restrictions that are currently enjoined and may no longer be. Even if injunctions are not lifted, the uncertainty about access is also very harmful to patients and providers.
To the bill. I'm not sure how many people here ever heard of, there's so many new young people here, or knew Dr. Quentin Young. He was a well-respected physician. He opened many health clinics in the city of Chicago. He was the de facto public health authority. He was beloved, and he worked at Cook County Hospital, where he did a residency rotation. He was a healthcare legend that we lost in 2016. He had done an interview with the Chicago Sun-Times a while back about what it was like as a resident in 1948 doing this rotation in OB in the septic unit of Cook County Hospital. This was a time when abortions were a criminal offense. In his interview, Dr. Young would describe the women who were very, very desperate to have an abortion and attempted to do these procedures themselves, and how they used whatever was available to do it. Paintbrushes, pencils, knitting needles. He saw perforated vaginas, uteruses, untreatable infections, and women who hemorrhaged to death. Women were in comas, he said. They had raging fevers, and most of the time, the physicians who were on this rotation had to finish what back alley butchers began. Some women paid for abortions, illegal abortions, and they would go to hotels, and these butchers would put them on tables and just leave them there because performing this was a crime. And it just illustrated the grim vulnerability of these women, the grim vulnerability associated with abortion when it was criminal. He said, as a young intern, I was responsible for completing the septic abortions to save them from death. The volume was so large, I think I did at least 20 a day. Many of these women, the ones who survived, became infertile. Many died. The one that sticks out in my mind the most was a woman who was hemorrhaging to death and died. It made me the saddest because she had 7 children at home who became orphans. Young summed it up in 1948 by saying that abortion is not a modern development. Every civilization had it. The fact is, they will take place. The question physicians were faced with in 1948 is that if it does take place, how do we make it safe?
Representative Feigenholtz, excuse me one moment. Representative Conroy, do you wish to offer your time to Representative Feigenholtz?
Yes, please.
Representative Feigenholtz for 5 minutes.
Friends, I have never seen a happy abortion. This is a source of great concern, not just for women, for doctors, and for their families. These are not frivolous decisions. They're full of thought and contradiction. Some of the remarks I've heard from my friends across the side of the aisle who feel as strongly and passionately as I do about this, I have to say that it is clear that you are opposed to safe, legal abortion. Some of the things you are asking are nothing more than a smokescreen to complete the right-wing agenda of the leader of the free world, Donald Trump. He is on an agenda, admittedly, to send women back to those back alley abortions and back to those septic units. My mother was a doctor, and she was an Orthodox Jew. She put herself through medical school. She was one of 4 women who graduated medical school in 1932. When the abortion debate became public and elevated in 1973 after Roe, I asked her if she would ever perform, or has she ever performed, an abortion. She was silent. As my colleagues said earlier, let's trust women. Let's trust doctors. At a time when this country is under attack by a movement that wants to send women back, set women back decades, Illinois is poised to be the beacon, the state that wants to protect women from the horrors of the past. Please, please, for the children of Curtis Tarver, and for the children and nieces of Jen Gong Dershowitz, and for future generations of all the daughters of this state, let's protect them and vote aye. Thank you.
The chair recognizes Representative McAuliffe.
I yield my time to Representative Bourne.
Representative Bourne for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the bill. Heard a lot of debate on what this bill does and doesn't do. I just wanted to clarify what's in this bill that we are voting on. There's been a lot of conversation about not being doctors. Under this bill, you don't have to be a doctor to perform an abortion either. There's been a lot of conversation about what happens if abortion is made illegal. There is nothing that we are voting on today, or that we will be voting on, that will make abortion illegal in Illinois. Currently, if there is a viable pregnancy and the life or health of the mother is in danger, abortion is legal. You don't need this bill. Instead, that definition is vastly expanded in this bill. In Illinois, if you are carrying a baby that is not ever going to be viable, abortion is legal in Illinois. You don't need this bill. What this bill does do, we heard something earlier that said there is no woman who chooses an abortion with a healthy baby late term. The Guttmacher Institute, which some of you may know, which is the preeminent pro-choice research institute, actually says that's not the case. In a survey of 272 women who had late-term abortions, they acknowledge, it says, data suggests that most women seeking later terminations are not doing so for the reasons of fetal anomaly or life endangerment. So what are we doing with this bill? Voting on this bill is allowing third trimester post-viability abortions to happen outside of the strict life and health of the mother, and we are opening up viability to mean that some babies would not be determined to be viable until they took a breath. This is not about keeping abortion legal in Illinois. This is about a vast expansion of what is allowed. Please, for the viable babies who are waiting to be born, vote no.
Chair recognizes Representative Kifowit for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
She indicates that she will.
We just had a statement about what the bill does or doesn't do. What I've heard in debate is that the bill in and of itself is stating what Illinois doesn't do already because it's enjoined by the courts, and therefore, in essence, supports the status quo. Is this correct or not?
Yes.
And also, because these are enjoined and they're not enforced, and we're providing the status quo, do you believe there will be a significant shift in viewpoint or ideology if this bill goes into effect?
I'm not sure I follow.
Do you think extreme actions will all of a sudden appear and start becoming norm if this bill passes?
I believe that we are at risk currently as these cases come down of those injunctions being lifted and those extreme barriers becoming effective, if that's what you're asking.
So the court, but if this bill becomes a law, individuals won't all of a sudden start seeking, as was said, to take into account babies that want to be born. All of a sudden, there will be a swell of behavior that's not happening today.
Agreed.
So to the bill, and just to be clear, I don't speak much on this floor, and this bill does cause me angst to some degree because I believe abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. It is a utopian view that no one would have an unintended pregnancy, and this is just not reality. We have situations of domestic violence. We have an example of a forced pregnancy on a 12-year-old that was given today, and the rhetoric compelled me to speak in favor of this bill because I, as an individual who grew up in a troublesome household of divorced parents that were constantly fighting, was able as a 16-year-old to take matters in my own hands and engage in my own family planning and get protection from my own doctor without any interference from my parents who were busy fighting each other in divorce court than taking care of their children. I was able to have my 2 children, and I know that any woman who does have a pregnancy that is healthy would not consider doing what was extraordinarily stated on the other side is completely irrational and technically false. I was able to plan my children, I was able to plan my family, and that's what this bill is about. I cannot pretend to know what it's like to be raped, abused, a pregnant 12-year-old, or to live in a situation that these occurrences happen. I cannot pretend to know what it's like to have an unintended pregnancy because I was able to get the services that I needed to make sure that I had my family at the time I wanted to. I believe that we do need to strive to reduce unintended pregnancies, to bolster family planning, and to give options to individuals so that they don't find themselves in a situation having to choose and having to make this choice. Because again, I do believe that abortions should be safe, legal, and rare, and we as a society should strive to ensure that people have reproductive health care so that they can have the children that they want. I think that some of the arguments that I've heard today border on the line of being ridiculous, of expounding upon and really, as was previously said, disrespecting doctors, disrespecting women, and overall being disrespectful to making sure that we have comprehensive reproductive health. Thank you.
The chair recognizes Representative Mason for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Will the sponsor yield?
She indicates that she will.
Thank you. Those of you who have come to know me know that I am first and foremost a mom who loves her babies, even though they're 19 and 14 already. They are and always will be my babies. And I'm grateful every single day for them and so incredibly blessed. I stand here today as a mom and a woman in support of the Reproductive Health Act because I believe, and the vast majority of my constituents who have been contacting me throughout the session about it believe, that a woman has a right to bodily autonomy. A woman has a right to control her own body. And a woman has the right to work with her own medical providers and make decisions for her own body that are right for her based on acceptable standards of clinical practice. My own mother had 5 children. She grew up in a pre-Roe versus Wade era. And she always told me the story of laying in the emergency room with a gallbladder issue when a young woman was brought into the bed next to her. My mother described listening to the doctors and the police that accompanied her berate and scream at her and treat her like a hardened criminal because she had broken the law by trying to abort her baby with a coat hanger. My mother then listened to the woman hemorrhage and die right next to her. My mother always told me that she didn't know if she herself could ever have an abortion, and that was her choice. But she realized at that moment that women will continue to fight for the right for their bodily autonomy, and that no woman should ever die as a result of it. And I ask this body, should Roe versus Wade be overturned, are you all ready and willing to make women felons for fighting for their own reproductive freedom? Are you willing to lock up women for that? I think of that. I also think about my work as a longtime advocate for domestic violence. And I see very regularly rape and pregnancy as a common tactic used by abusers to control their partners and make them vulnerable and dependent. And I ask you, are we now going to literally assist these abusers by giving them the power not only to forcibly impregnate, but then to carry the child of their rapists? I think of my dear friends, a couple who desperately wanted a baby and late in term learned that the baby would not survive more than a few hours or days at most outside the womb. They made the very painful and difficult decision that hurts them to this day to end that pregnancy, which really means inducing labor and holding that baby till she passed, surrounded by their love. They had to make that gut-wrenching, heartbreaking decision. I am disgusted by the propaganda that is out there suggesting that any woman late in her pregnancy or even after giving birth, as I've heard from some, and then decide, I just don't want this child, and simply end its life. It's disgusting and it's insulting to women, it's insulting to me, and it's insulting to the doctors who have taken that Hippocratic oath and vowed not to harm viable babies. To suggest otherwise is wrong. But it is up to the healthcare provider and not legislators to determine when that viability exists. And to that suggestion from across the aisle that a provider would find a loophole for financial gain is reprehensible. It is absolutely reprehensible. Do we ask heart surgeons if they're making their medical decisions based on the money that they'll make as a result of that procedure? Do we ask podiatrists the same? We do not. And I don't suggest we start questioning all physicians about whether their decisions are financially motivated. This bill does not expand or change laws in Illinois, and the propaganda that's been out there is just not true. It is time that we stand up for the women of Illinois and tell them that we trust them. Thank you.
Our final speaker on in this debate will be Representative Welch for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, to the bill. I rise today as a member of the Illinois House, a member who came to this body committed to treat every Illinois resident with dignity, with respect, and equality. But I am also a man, a son, a husband, and a father. In fact, my little 5-year-old daughter is truly the joy of my life. For me, the RHA says to my wife and my daughter that they are equal, not just in the confines of my family. The RHA makes it clear that my wife and my daughter are equal in the eyes of the law, that their health care should be treated just as that. Health care. Today, we have a chance to send that message to women all across Illinois, to end the use of women's health care as a political football and respect the decisions about women's health care that should be made between women and their doctors. As I speak, I am conscious of the reality that I am a man participating in this discussion. But, and this matters, because it is men all across this country right now who are actively participating in this discussion. All across the United States, from Georgia and Alabama to Ohio, our neighbors in Missouri and Utah, men are passing harsh laws that subject women and their physicians to criminal penalties. Criminal penalties. Think about that, men. We go to our doctors all the time, and the decisions we make, we don't face criminal penalties. But Alabama says a woman could face a felony charge for making a health decision, for seeking and providing health care. As a man and a legislator who makes policy, I reject that view. And today, I rise to stand with women in support of the RHA. I will not, here today or here ever, tell a woman what she can or cannot do with her body. That is not my place or any man in this room. I have heard so much in this debate over the last few months about our process used here and the nature of this bill. But I have some questions for those who raise these issues. If you object to the process used here, have you objected to the rush in these other states to adopt abortion bans? These bans are simply vehicles to get a case to the Supreme Court. We all know that. Their one goal is to overturn Roe versus Wade. Have you objected to that process? And if you think that this bill goes too far, who do you want to send to prison when women seek health care? The new Georgia law would criminalize women who even travel outside the state to seek an abortion. Is that really what we want here in Illinois? Is that truly what we want in Illinois? This is not the legacy that I want to leave for my daughter. The Georgia law.
Representative, you've run out of time, but please bring your remarks to a close.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Georgia law is not the type of law that I want for my wife, and this is not the type of law that I want for women in Illinois. I stand here today, and I proudly support the Reproductive Health Act, and I urge all of my colleagues, especially the men in this room, to join me in voting to treat health care as health care for everyone in Illinois, men and women. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Cassidy to close.
Thank you, and thank you to all of my colleagues who have worked so hard to get us to this day, for your input, your encouragement, your tough questions, and to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle for your passionate and heartfelt support of your position. Today, I stand up for all of the people impacted by the concerted efforts to take away our right to self-determination. To my male colleagues who today talked about not believing that it's a man's business to say what a woman should do with her body, what I say is, it's also not my business to tell you what to do with your body. I want us all to have that right to self-determination. And that is what the RHA will do. To our neighbors in Illinois who hear the news around the country and worry that this war on women is coming to Illinois, I say not on my watch. To the people in Missouri and Alabama and Georgia and Kentucky and Mississippi and Ohio, I say not on my watch. My colleagues, the fierce freshman women, I love you ladies to the moon and back. You are not going to say the word. My sisters in the trenches for decades, I love you. Representative Ammons, for speaking the truth about the reality of who's really harmed. I am here with you and I'm not letting up. And to Representative Flowers, for your lifelong dedication and fierce advocacy. I am your partner in the fight to fight maternal mortality and disparate impacts in the community. I will always be your partner in that fight. To my boys, who quite frankly wouldn't be here without access to true reproductive health care. Because what that means is not just abortion, and you all heard me talk about my abortion, but it means that I had access to contraception, I had access to fertility care, I had access to that abortion that saved my life and preserved my fertility. I had access to excellent maternity care, including determining how to give birth And now, being a woman of a certain age, I have access to care to help manage the symptoms of menopause. Reproductive health care is comprehensive. I thank my nieces for using that care to bring the next generation of our family. I thank my 4 sisters for ensuring that I grew up safe in our chaotic home, fully aware of my own power and my ability to be self-determined. And finally, I thank my late mother, who truly lived life on her own terms, determined that her 4 daughters and her 2 sons could do so as well, and that her 2 sons would respect that for their sisters and their future spouses. Today, Illinois says we are better than this war on women. Illinois says we trust women. Please join me in saying that loud and clear. We trust women. Vote aye.
Members, Representative Bourne has requested a verification. All members will be in their chairs and vote their own switches. The question is, shall Senate Bill 25 pass? All those in favor vote aye. All opposed vote nay. The voting is open. Have all voted who wish? Have all voted who wish? Have all voted who wish? Mr. Clerk, please take the record. On this question, there are 64 voting in favor, 50 voting against, and 4 voting present. Mr. Clerk, please read the names of those voting in their affirmative.
A poll of those voting in the affirmative. Representative Ammons, Representative Andrade, Representative Arroyo, Representative Buckner, Representative Carroll, Representative Cassidy, Representative Connor, Representative Conroy, Representative Costa Howard, Representative Crespo, Representative D'Amico, Representative Davis, Representative DeLuca, Representative Didich, Representative Edley Allen, Representative Evans, Representative Feigenholtz, Representative Flowers, Representative Ford, Representative Gable, Representative Gong Gershowitz, Representative Gordon Booth, Representative Greenwood, Representative Gazzardi, Representative Halpin, Representative Harper, Representative Harris, Representative Barbara Hernandez, Representative Lisa Hernandez, Representative Kifowit, Representative Lilly, Representative Ma, Representative Manley, Representative Martwick, Representative Mason, Representative Mayfield, Representative Myers-Martin, Representative Moeller, Representative Morgan, Representative Moylan, Representative Mussman, Representative Ortiz, Representative Pappas, Representative Ramirez, Representative Rita, Representative Robinson, Representative Slaughter, Representative Smith, Representative Stava Murray, Representative Stewart, Representative Tarver, Representative Petty, Representative Turner, Representative Villa, Representative Villanueva, Representative Walker, Representative Welch, Representative West, Representative Ann Williams, Representative Jawahariel Williams, Representative Willis, Representative Yingling, Representative Zaleski, and Mr. Speaker.
The chair recognizes Representative Bourne. On this question, there are 64 voting in favor, 50 voting against, 4 voting present, and this bill, having received a constitutional majority, is hereby declared passed.